truly crazy. I'm just going to say hi to people who are tuning in, if there are people tuning in. We're going to give it a few more minutes to get started, probably around 6:03. I'll do my little intro spiel. We usually just wait until everybody who's coming appears.
Okay. I appreciate the aggregate, collecting, and then beginning.
Yeah. Trying to let the stragglers get in the door, you know.
In my mind, in these moments with the live stream and digital sphere experience, I do like to pretend I am actually sitting in an auditorium towards the front of it. And it is like people are walking in very slowly or running past it outside. Depends.
Yeah. It's a version of that digitally where a bunch of tiny doors are opening in the web space and people are filtering in.
Boop, boop, walking in.
And the other funny thing about doing it on Zoom the way that we do it is that it's being live streamed on YouTube, and therefore we can't see who's there. We can't see any names or anything like that. But usually when Jess inputs questions, she says who asked the question. So that helps.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's nice.
It's kind of nice. The anonymity of it is nice. Do you have a beverage?
I do. I have a Pabst Blue Ribbon with me.
Nice.
This is my standing soldier for the experience. I think I also have a glass of water somewhere nearby. And then an orange juice too.
I'm serving you ACV health and wellness today.
I'm proud.
Yeah. Trying to keep it fermented, you know.
Kombucha or else.
Yes.
A really big container of that recently, and the physiological benefits are hilarious.
Yeah.
Yep. That's all.
That's all that we can say on the live stream.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with a little intro. Thank you to everyone who's tuning in. My name is Ari. My pronouns are she and they. I am the chief curator of Union Hall. There's a fly in my living room that's been here for 3 days. They're here as well. And welcome to the Chain Letter Curatorial Talk. For those of you who maybe are tuning in from afar and aren't familiar with Union Hall is a nonprofit arts and exhibition space in downtown Denver. And today we just want to thank our sponsors that have helped with our calendar throughout the year. That is the Colorado Community Foundation and the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts. And I also want to thank and introduce my co-curator for Chain Letter, Alexander Richard Wilson, ladies and gentlemen. And
hello.
Girls, gays, and theys.
Hi, community. I am Alexander Richard Wilson, and I am the co-curator of Chain Letter, which has and is a pretty, has been a pretty big, significant part of my art the past couple months in Denver. Yeah.
And what I will do next is go ahead and screen share some photos from Chain Letters as we talk about it.
We can
share screen. Google Chrome desktop. Where are you? Well, let's go with this, I guess. Okay, apparently I have to grant access. Hold on a second. Sorry about this.
Okay. The internet is full of loading still. Kind of funny. Okay.
I think it's because I have a new computer.
Oh, I'm sorry. That takes so long to grant the permissions now. It takes like 2 months.
Oh, wow. Actually, it says that Zoom will not be able to record the contents of your screen until it is quit. Hey, Jess, who's out there in the ether.
Can you hear us, Jess?
Would you be able to screen share? Because I am unable to, unfortunately. Sorry for the technical difficulties, everyone. She says yes.
Yay.
Perfect. Okay. In the meantime, we'll just go ahead and get started.
Yeah.
Chain letter presentation, I'm sure, will appear in a few minutes. So let's talk about chain letter and how we kind of how we came together to work on this project, which is really, we have Instagram to thank, I guess.
Yeah, I want to say this is one of those, I would shout out the success of that commingling space, despite the sensation of rolling in the garbage of American business. It is lovely to find genuine, like hard form connections and also genuine hard form, I guess, ah, agreements. And therein, yeah, Instagram's cool for that.
It is. It's like, it's funny how those relationships sometimes, while it might seem like kind of a passing thing of like, oh, this is somebody I'm connecting with, like in this space, it can actually turn into like really productive collaborations and friendships. And I have a number of those under my belt at this point. And I have to say, it's like sometimes there's a really good side to living and dying by the algorithm. And
Yeah,
meeting you
absolutely.
via Instagram was definitely one of the highlights this year, and getting to work on this project together, which like, I think I was thinking through kind of like overarching themes and this like idea that, you know, all of the artists in the show are of a similar age and similar sort of experience of the world, though like from very diverse backgrounds all over the country, all kinds of
Yeah.
different, you know, sort of landing pads. But I think the connecting thing is that like this is a group of people who in our lifetime have experienced this like first wave of technology being like such a huge part of our day to day,
Mhm.
and this overwhelming sense of connectedness that we end up having to others because of that. And I think it's very fitting that we like started talking about doing a show together after having met, you know, just on
On the
social,
internet.
yeah,
Yeah,
internet.
literally. Yeah.
Yeah.
The evolution of MySpace too is pretty cool in the contemporary, I'll say, as far as the haha, we share a love of a particular emotional scaled or the color purple and orange, you know, in a simpler and less, um, interestingly didactic way. Mostly, I think in meeting you digitally, I became aware of this kind of like spectrum sense of the Front Ranges
Mhm.
artistic community, and it was really cool to like finally start to get a really smart, it felt like I was getting a really smart sense of the scale and the intentions and the kind of like overarching collective thoughts about how to represent this space and these kind of contemporary emotional dynamics we deal with as people living in America, but also people within this region living in America. And then also to be introduced to someone who taps into a social sphere enough to convey the artistry of the group too. And I think that was also like for me a highlight in meeting you and also in working on the show, but mostly in meeting you. Yeah.
Thanks. I think I like thinking about the group of artists too. There is like this nexus of Denver being sort of a central player in all of
Mhm.
this, because many of the artists either grew up in Denver or have moved there, relocated there from elsewhere,
Yeah.
um, including both of us. But then also there's like this Midwest, Southwest corridor that is happening too, like having
Mhm.
Tori in Santa Fe, myself in Taos, and then, um, you know, folks, several artists in Chicago or who have a connection to Chicago. So I think like, and St. Louis. And so I think, very often I think people are like, well, what is Denver? Is it the Midwest? Is it the Southwest? Is it the West? Like what, how do you characterize like what the character of that city is? Because it feels
Mhm.
like a Midwest city in a lot of ways. But then it also has this like sort of Western, like lingering quality about it. And so I think like the group of artists kind of came together too through this like connection point of the city, but it isn't a group of people that I would say are like characterized by their connection to Denver. Whereas like there are artists in Denver who are very Denver.
Yeah.
Um, but the artists that are in this grouping, I think many of them have like one foot in the door somewhere else, sort of, which is also something I really like about the grouping.
I agree with that completely. I think in the way I went about kind of involving people with the show in theory as we were building it out, I kept thinking about how to um, provide some kind of presentation or present artists in situation who I thought conveyed some character elements that are also part of the Western
Mhm.
very perspective without necessarily having those hardline character elements in this kind of very formalist Rocky Mountain Denver way.
Right.
And I thought that was kind of fun too. The like conversations between the Midwest and the Mountain West shouldn't be too difficult to translate the spaces in between also. And I think in that kind of centrality that Denver takes in artistic tone making, especially maybe more now or after. I think saying that's kind of silly. Over time, all places command more. Um, but I would say Denver definitely has developed a tone. And I thought, oh, these people involve themselves with this tone really interestingly. And as we'll discuss as we keep going, it'll probably be like funny how now I can make those associations really like statement clear and broadly. It's interesting. Yeah.
Yes. Jess, if you want to go ahead and go to the opening slide, that would be lovely. We'll kind of use it as a transition point. There she is. Lovely. Yeah, so we started working on Chain Letter together in the summer.
Yeah, it was June.
Yeah,
Gosh, I think you reached
June
out to
or
me
July. Or
at
no,
the
even like May,
it was
maybe.
May. Yeah, you reached out to me about I have an idea.
Yeah.
Whoa.
And
Yeah.
like co-curating too is one of those things that like in my experience can be, it either like really works well or it doesn't, because I think, it can be like two people trying to drive the truck in like a different direction or maybe in the same direction. And I felt like this all came together really naturally. Like the premise was basically like, we want to do this show, but we want to center it with like, okay, what artists do we really want to see in a room together? And then sort of like look at what the conceptual links are between those people rather than starting with like a thematic thing and working backwards from that. And so we both kind of said, okay, let's come up with 3 artists each ish. And Alexander's going to be in the show, which is something that I really wanted to happen. And
Yeah.
so it was kind of like, okay, let's come up with a handful of people that we would really like to see in a room. And then as we got that list together, it was really clear, like, okay, no edits. These are like, this makes total sense as a show somehow. And then looking at the links between them from there.
Yeah, I'd say that I would say the caliber of makers you presented me with too. I feel like we did this in a staggering. It was at the same time though, and it was staggering at the same time, kind of.
Yeah.
But I just remember looking at their bodies of work as we were discussing, selecting the tone, and I want to say at the onslaught, Ari and I had talked extensively about prior to formalizing the curatorial statement for this, certain sensations in the American experience presently. And there was just kind of this like ephemeral cloud, around everything going on in the midst of finally getting a second shot in America, if you've done it, America, and in kind of processing, there's a bit of grieving, and then there's also a bit of hope for the future. And in thinking about artists who kind of vibed, it felt really easy to come back at the list with 3 or 4 others who complemented this initial statement. Oh, I think these few people. I'll also say though too, I feel like for this, I always had, not for this, but in the instance of something like this happening, the people I referenced or curated into the event, I feel like I would have done it if this opportunity had arisen in a way that's like a good way, but also a way about the clarity of the statement. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like it just seemed to be that in thinking about, artists who we really resonated with, like maybe, selfishly, there's like some grain of our own work that is here, and like thinking about themes that seem important to both of us. Like there's people who are picking up on those as well. And so it's like, contemporaries. Like there's something that feels friendly about all of this. And I think a lot of it has to do with like a lot of us in the show went to school together also, or crossed over, in some academia space, or even younger for some of the folks in the show. So maybe worth noting, and Jess, you can go to the next slide after I run down these artist names. There we go. There they are. I just wanted to, we're like talking about them as a group of people, but I think it's possible to like say everybody on the list and like where they hail from, how they are connected to us, and where they currently live. So Jason Abrams is a longtime friend of yours, so I'll let you do that one.
Yeah, so I've known Jason since freshman year of college. I walked into the open plan studio space at SAIC, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and Jason was working on a perspective painting, and I was like, I love that painting, and we've been kind of classic friends since in When Harry Met Sally way, less like Harry meeting Sally, but just broad strokes friendship where you scream at each other over pancakes and coffee.
Yes.
Jason is from Denver, Colorado, and he's been a contemporary fine art painter and then comic book artist for about 3-5 years. And he'd been working on the work in the show for a while. And then I overran. But if I can spring Micah next, I can do Micah and Asosa. Yeah?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Micah Dillman is from Dubuque, Iowa. And Micah studied fiber and material studies at SAIC also. I met them in college too. And Micah and I share a kind of like queer underlying awareness. And I guess that annoying, what some would call snowflakey sadness, which I think is important to know. You got, a friend who can respond to the moments that the landscape presents us with in kind. Asosa is a friend of mine and also a student who had gone to the School of the University of Chicago. She graduated and also studied fiber and material studies. Asosa and I weren't actually super conversational in college. It was more this mutual respect kind of thing about her attentiveness to the body of work, about their, attentiveness to the complexity of building a figuratively referential thing or any kind of object at all. And I've always been fond of the maker who demands and also can command their material. And I would say Asosa's approach has always been like this result. And as far as like artists whose work I've even dreamed about being as result about, she kind of is before her time to me.
And Asosa's work is there in the image on the screen. Both of the wall pieces that are there belong to Asosa. So we'll come back to like all of that, but just since the plug is there. So all four of you are SAIC folk, in addition to the next person on the list, who is Corey Fetter, who is also from Denver, grew up in Denver, and went to high school with Jason, actually. And then I met Corey, I guess kind of on the internet, because I think she had like just moved away when I first saw her work at Leisure, which was a artist run space in Denver for a while. She had a show there, and then I think she wasn't living in Denver or moved away shortly after that. So we like kind of didn't overlap. And then, we have friends in common, and then just happened that we both were living in New Mexico at the same time. And so have become, friends through living nearby and kind of thinking about projects we could work on together, and was really excited to have her in this show in Denver, because she was somebody who I always thought of as like an artist who really, was relational to like Denver's DIY scene. She lived in, a house that was all artists. And I thought, I think when I think of that period of time, which like in some ways is, there's just not as much of that going on in Denver anymore as things have become more developed. There's a lot less of those types of spaces. And she's someone who kind of, when I think of those types of spaces, which were really crucial in Denver when I first moved there, it seemed that, she should reappear in this show. And then I actually didn't know that she had gone to school with Jason, but it was kind of a funny overlap that they ended up together in the show. And then Maddie Job is from Clearwater, Florida, and that's where I'm from, coincidentally. And we didn't know each other in Clearwater, but I knew her sister. And she's a grad student finishing up her MFA at CU Boulder right now, which is also where I went to grad school. And again, we didn't overlap there. But a close friend of mine, when Maddie had first started the program, said, "Did you know there's someone else at CU Boulder from Clearwater?" Which was just like mind blowing to me. And yeah, have been following her work ever since and have wanted to include her in something. And she's somebody who I feel really aligned with in terms of like, our upbringing experiences were pretty similar. And so it was cool to have somebody who like spoke to the place that I'm from, and her work is about Florida and like really heavily about like a very different landscape than some of the other artists, including yourself, who do landscape work that are in this show. And then Grace is somebody who I've also just been following for quite a long time. She went to school in Fort Collins. She's from Windsor, Colorado, which is just a little bit east of Fort Collins, I believe. Grace, correct me if I'm wrong on that. But very, very nearby. And so to me, Grace is like a super Colorado-y artist. And her work deals heavily with themes regarding colonialism and white supremacy in the West, and sort of like how a lot of development and takeover of spaces has been done by white folks, and the legacy of that on the Western landscape. And so super smart work. Obviously, we'll get into all of that. But I felt like, doing a show, and she now lives in Denver. And I felt like, doing a show that heavily features artists from the West, like she's just a great example of like a contemporary artist thinking about the West in a really smart way. So those were my picks: Corey, Maddie, and Grace. And then there's you. And
I think
yeah.
you picked me technically, I'll
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. Another person thinking about the West too. So that's a nice correlate there too.
Yeah. Yeah, we can move to the next slide though if you want to, I think. Or do we want to break down?
Yeah, we can go ahead and move to the next slide. I have like detailed shots of all these works that are here.
Cool. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tell us about the fire line.
Okay, so this is funny, and I think we discussed the scale of the sculpture I had thought about bringing for this show as what we see before us is Fireline. And this is kind of the event of both kind of like sitting around in quarantine, looking at art history and laughing about modernism and minimalism, feeling kind of like, haha, it's a $15 million rectilinear box that does represent the weight of death. And it's like actually quite impressive, but also quite funny sometimes to interact with these objects personally. And then I was watching, events unfold in Colorado, I want to say in the middle of last summer or towards the end of last summer, upon getting here almost. And there was just this thing wherein the East Troublesome Fire, or one of the fires that had happened between Denver and Fort Collins, had separated this woman from her property lines, extant features, and more family. And I was just thinking about the severity of climate change and the sensations that we have before us and the way these things do kind of divide us. And I wanted to put this kind of object in a gestural sense. I didn't really want to spend too much time on the features of the object. And I kind of also wanted to play with the historical elements of solid surface sculpture, minimal treatment, finish work. I say all of these things aware of walking into that space and being like, yeah, everything's on fire though. That was kind of what I wanted to do with the work, was to kind of take that shape and align it more with this very, also what it is to me, a divisive dimension, and the experience of being divided by fire as something you can't just run through.
I think there's also like something within all of the work in the show where like on the surface, there's a brightness or a happiness to it that I think is like an immediate sensation of like, wow. And this is the thing with like minimalism, right? These like, there's all this below the surface, but like whatever your gut, then you have to kind of like look further. And so I think with this work, as with much else, it's like, wow, beautiful colors, like what's going on here? What are we thinking about? And then as you sort of start to understand it as like topography, it becomes clear that there's like something a little sad about it. And all of the work sort of, I think, has that like little bit of, whether it's like a melancholy or a nostalgia or just a criticism of something that we've like taken for granted as normal. A lot of the work in this show has something to do with that. And this takes up such a presence in the gallery too. And it kind of, it's like the first thing that you see as you turn from like the lobby entrance area into the main sort of gallery. And so I think like using it as this line to draw you back into the space, it's like you're following, but then it becomes this marker, as you move through the exhibition, that's kind of following you.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to, in acknowledging that call out to the directional sense it takes the interactive person who walks into the space on, also use it as the architectural tool it is, and have that effect be the case where you do kind of have this moment where you're on the other side of something and you can't just like cut through space. And I don't know, I kind of have this thing about the concept of evacuating a show or running out really quickly of an exhibition. And I've done it. I've seen people do it. And sometimes I'm like, no, don't do that. And I really wanted to kind of ground the room too, if I could, and I don't think I've grounded it at all, but in assisting Corey in that space, it feels very justified. And I appreciate the way the work works there.
There's also like, you have this horizontal dimension to follow, and then Corey kind of takes you up to the sky, which we'll get. I think Corey's work is a little bit closer to the end of the presentation, but we'll make our way there. Jess, you can go ahead and switch over. I think we should talk about this one because I just love hearing you talk about Micah's work.
Okay, so Micah Dillman is I guess, in the way, gosh, there's so much happening in the world. In the way that there are people who critique the white, queer, contemporary person for all of those very anti-progressive notions of what queer people should be, Micah runs around knocking these things over and defying them, but also presenting their experience with the kind of like matrix of living in a way that I think is super Midwestern and very American sculpture, American finishing. It does also remind me sometimes of, oh gosh, there's not Norman Rockwell, because it's not Rockwell-esque at all, but it's very much like I am depicting an idea and also a reality at the same time. This piece, Great, is, I believe the name's Great, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, so this was what? It's acrylic, and it is enamel and plastic and metal hooks, right? Or, yeah. So this was just kind of like something we looked at in curating the show of Micah's catalog. And we were just like, damn, that's too visually and physically, emotionally on the nose.
Right, like the whole show, actually.
Yeah, it's like the whole show is this week. Of like, especially after I think the year I feel like a lot of people have had, like maybe 71% of the global community has had even. There was something to me about the millennial pink
Right.
Bismol-y finish. Yeah. And it's not a candy bar. It was something else, and it
Mhm.
was great. It kind of looks like a candy bar here to me.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Or
I
it could
also,
be like the plaque on the side of a building that like marks the year in which like X courthouse was founded. Like it could
exactly,
be, yeah, or
so
a
many things
polished
have been,
statue or something.
so many things have been renamed, you never
Mhm.
know. But the reference to also the vagueness of the kind of like great in a broken piece and
Mhm.
how it does kind of slip into everyone's life and reference was also just like, oh my gosh, perfect.
Yeah.
Also, the hanging system Micah uses reminds me of the cleaning up a childhood mess,
Mhm.
finding those kinds of pieces of things and feeling bad. I don't know. It just definitely hit.
I think there might be more Micah work on the next slide too.
Okay, cool. I'm into that.
Yes.
Okay, sick.
And I
Uh,
put them all side by side, like with a close up, because I thought it might be worth to see these three as a grouping because they feel like these three feel really connected to me.
they are, and I think in kind of curating them as pieces, I'm looking for the title naming for the middle one. And I feel like, give me 1 second. Well, I don't actually need a second. But no, in organizing them this way too, it felt like it continued this narrative arc-y kind of, not narrative arc, but this like sensory story we were trying to organize. And there was something to maintaining the tone pitch between each of these pieces consecutively that I think landed and is still landing the sensations of a space and the sensations of uh, childhood memory, and kind of like, again, I think these pieces too remind me of Colorado after living here in a
Mhm.
really funny way. The depiction shrine cut out at the beginning, and then just the staircase up the concreted stair. These things kind of call out to just the, oh, not liminal, but the kind of like American isolation experience. I don't know.
Yeah, I love the materials that Micah uses. It feels like each thing that's included has like some kind of personal significance where like these have been
Mm,
collected and archived and then collaged together to like make an internal narrative that like lives within each piece and kind of just like the collecting and arranging is very appealing to me. And then the one on the tall, skinny brown one is called Faux Boy,
mm,
Faux. And it's like this faux wood grain pillow with a ring that hangs down, and there's like something really fetishy about it, and something
mhm.
also really sweet and unassuming about it. And I find it to be sorry, Leo, when I'm talking on Zoom, he thinks I'm talking to him. So he just wants to me. You
You
gotta
just
go
like for conversation.
back. But yeah, I find all of these like really tactile and they're also really small compared to a lot of the other work in the show. So it allows for like these more quiet moments, more intimate
Mhm.
moments. And I think that Micah also is someone who, interest in gender and sort of like kind of moving and living outside the rules of like traditional gender presentations or binaries of any
Mhm.
sort. There's something that comes through in this work about construction and building.
Yeah.
And I think that something that a lot of people who are trans or non-binary experience is like this rebuilding of who you are according to rules that you have to make for yourself sort of, and there's something about that that comes through um in this work to me
That
also.
was a perfect comment. I have never been able to formalize that thought. And yeah, I would say too, the materiality is one of the high points of like anything Micah kind of handles too. um, and I appreciate the most out of this sequence was the ring for Fellboy
Mhm.
as an object, as like an object in
Yeah.
display. It was a very powerful thing. The context for the scale here is like a foot by a foot to like 18 inches by 18 inches
Mhm.
max. I think the hanging height for that ring is maybe 18 inches. I think it, yeah, from the ring to the top of the pillow, maybe.
And
So
just to me, the title for the middle one is Found the Floor, Next Where's Ground?
yes,
Poetry.
perfect. Yeah. And it all kind of also does it presents itself as poetry too, the scale.
Yeah.
Just
I think we can go to the next one. I think it's you again, maybe.
oh gosh. Oh gosh. Oh funny. Okay.
Pandemic portraits.
I love
I'm
this.
gonna
Yeah,
turn the light on really quickly. It's getting like very, very dim. Sorry.
you're okay. Do I need to do a lighting check? Oh gosh.
I think that's gonna take us into evening. Okay.
Perfect. Okay, so yeah, these are the pandemic portraits that kind of started it all a little bit, but only for me in the like dealing with the pandemic a little bit. I just wanted to depict initially these were just kind of also like hobby pieces, emotional exhaust a concept pieces. And I was just thinking about what we'd gone through and the kind of like living with it sensation. And then also the living in our home, in a new home in Colorado. And all of these kinds of feelings of the things around us being very much a part of who we were or are in the very much like now that you've been in your home for six 6 to 12 months, like your identity is also tied to like these like clips that are like in a tray in your house, you know,
Mhm.
as like a thing. It's like, well, if I haven't seen more than 3 people and then these pliers, I guess I'm still real as this kind of like
Mhm.
emotional outflow.
Trying to ground yourself into like it's all still happening. I'm still alive. I'm still here.
Mhm. There was this thing too where it was like ideal to me to get them out like in process at the time I made them. Um, and I was going with the just the emotional tones of the end of last winter.
Mhm.
I didn't do a lot of reference work in looking at the formal take of interior portraits. I just talked to a lot of my friends. I was like, oh gosh, I have a funny idea. And I just went with isolate the figures in space
Mhm.
and kind of really surround ourselves with more artifacts of ourselves. So in the portrait of Grace on the wall, there's a painting of a painting she did in undergrad. And on the wall behind me, there's a painting of a painting I did. And kind of the things in front of me are things that are like vaguely, I would say, like if I were like melted down into small objects,
Mhm.
then in Grace, there's this collection of objects as well that resonates in this kind of palette sense of emotion. And I was also sitting there too and thinking about what other people were doing. And I was like, we're all doing this, aren't we? We're all sitting here kind of naked, mostly looking forward at nothing, a little bit today, tomorrow, and hopefully the following day, if nothing bad happens, literally at some point. What, yeah. And I kind of also wanted to get that on paper. I don't know. It doesn't necessarily feel like something you can write down clearly as much as something you can like snap a picture of or make a picture of. So here they are.
I think there's going to be for a long time work about the pandemic, like in some way, shape, or form. Like,
Mhm.
I think when it was all kind of first starting to happen, you saw a lot of artists go to the studio and be like, wow, I'm having all this uninterrupted creative time. And like, yes, not to downplay like the death and destruction of all of this, but also like I'm at home, I'm undisturbed, I'm like enjoying this. And then I think like as it start to set in the reality of it and how long we would really be dealing with it, like there was another type of work that started to come about.
Yeah.
And like I think that these felt when you first showed me these, like it just felt so honest to the experience of like solitude and just being completely alone in your home, not thinking about the outside world. Like I'm just like with my things and investigating my things more deeply. And yeah, I feel like the comment about like if you could melt yourself down into these objects, like it does have that quality to me resonating.
That's awesome. The ideal was achieved then. I was so yeah.
You did the matting yourself, which is also
Yeah,
so
that was fun.
impressive.
Yeah, these were matted on the gallery floor, which is just to say that if you watch this, you can always mat on the gallery floor, okay? There's no reason.
We say about Union Hall a lot, like the vibe in there is like a better funded DIY space. And it's always moments like that when people are like finishing up their work or like we're sitting on the floor having a beer, deciding like where to hang things, that it feels like a living room in a way.
Yeah.
And I always really enjoy, because it's always kind of felt like that to me, but to like bring artists into that is always really special.
Yeah.
I have no idea what image is next, but Jess, you can go ahead and hit it.
We'll find. Oh, yay. Oh, God.
I put these together onto one slide so we could talk about Grace's work, but I realized after the fact that it gives the impression, like because of the scale, that they're hung like this, but they're not next to each other in the space. And this photo makes them look like they are, but they're not. And actually, one of these paintings is a few years old. The one on the left, the pink and red tones, and then the one in the more green tone palette is really recent, was actually made for the exhibition. And so it was cool to pull something of Grace's that is a little bit older. And I think she was working more in these fiery tones a few years ago. And now like this green kind of sense of uneasy hospital-y color has been coming up a lot for her. And we talked about that during a studio visit with her.
Yeah.
So I was glad that we kind of got one of each, and they're spread out through the space too. So they're not, they're not actually on top of each other in this way. But, I said a little bit about Grace previously, like somebody who's really thinking about the West and the impact that, white colonial efforts have had like on the landscape, and kind of analyzing that in a more contemporary sense, like, what are white girls with Sprinter vans doing that is similar or different to white girls in covered wagons or whatever. And, yeah. I find, as somebody who tries to be, I think, pretty self-critical of like how I'm taking up space in the place that I live as a white woman. These resonate with me really, like always find the way that her female characters are taking up space to be really like helpful in that sort of thinking more deeply about how we got where we are, and what's ours and what's not ours.
Her work is really maybe the most brilliant thing. I think I never thought I would meet someone as visually representationally gifted at explaining what an ethically aware grieving of one's position white woman is like. And her work is that channeled. It's like, this is what it does look like when one is aware of the sordid sensations that come with the experience one now has to take in space, or the effect of one's experiential ephemera in a space. And she's even picking up this kind of like, gosh, there are other contemporary painters who would refuse to depict white women like this and would go for the figure of color first.
Right.
In her resistance to that, she's cemented this style I would just call sensational. And also resolved and even kind of reverent about the earth and grieving it. Yeah.
In this like earlier body of work, there were always like houses and barns on fire. And you can see that in this painting on the left, like there's the barn or house in the back behind the clothesline that's on fire. And we have our two like country lesbians huddling together for safety,
Mhm.
and or at least that's how I interpreted the narrative.
Yeah.
And then this one, she's like taking one glove off and the other glove is like on the ground, and then the grass kind of looks like fire. And so it to me like spoke back to this like fire line. And like, what do you hold on to when it's kind of all falling apart? And
Uh,
this image is just like, there's just so much movement and chaos that's coming. And with the fire that Grace paints, the fires are always like shooting out in every direction. So you like can't get away from them in the spaces that she creates. And sometimes there's like a white woman emerging out of the barn with like octopus fire hands, like taking down the landscape all around her. And then other times her characters are like hiding in fear. And this one is like a mix of both, because this person with the cowboy hat is like also giving us this sidelong knowing glance of
mhm.
maybe they started the fire. I don't
Maybe
know.
we're
I love to imagine the narrative though. And then Corn Girl, as we have
Dave
lovingly
called
nicknamed
her. Yeah.
her, I think this is like something a little newer in that I think Grace, like going back and spending more time in Windsor, at least like this is sort of what we walked through um in the studio visit that we had with her when she was making this painting, like just noticing the landscape of that place. And corn is something that like heavily dominates, the agricultural land in and around the town that she grew up in. That's like the product that they're making. And so she's kind of, I think, reflecting on her place in this landscape, and
Mhm.
he has this super sort of like pensive, lost in thought moment happening. But I love that she also has her like gardening kneeler so that her knees are
Mhm.
comfy as
Yeah.
she's digging in the dirt.
I love how often in her paintings, at least from what I remember of also Grace Kennison's studio visit, her figures are doing a process and then experiencing the landscape in a way that is very active. And with this one, the formalism of the shears in the ground and the shovel on top with a sprout that's being saved or maybe murdered. It's a different flower than what you would have in a cornfield. And I don't know, it's just a really interesting and emotional kind of space. The wind in this painting, too, you can kind of feel
Oh
in
yeah.
the gallery. And I thought that was kind of just an amazing effect.
And the color of that wind is that green, like that sort of sickly green that
Yeah.
she's using a lot of. Um,
Mm,
which yeah, it's been cool to like spend more time looking at both of these paintings too, because it's cool to see her progression as an artist over the past few years. I mean, Grace has made like immense strides in her practice, and is now has a studio at Tank, and has really kind of like fell into the Denver community, and has really become,
yeah.
I think has learned a lot from other artists, and is somebody who's very curious about other artists and their work and the way that they're approaching space. And so I think it's really clear. And she did sort of rework the painting on the left a little bit and add some new things, but overall, I think there's like a sense of maturity too that's starting to emerge in her work that is really
Mhm.
special. And it's cool to be able to show things from both time periods.
Yeah. The
And
contrast.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I would say, no, they contrast so well, or they complement each other so well. But it is, I'd say your statement's crazy right. She's just also a wonderful maker to kind of like meet and then find out the development is so significant. But this awareness is the same about the figure and the figure she's depicting. It's actually so
Like
smart.
this is something, the sort of core ideal about her work is like something that she hit onto so early, like in
Mm,
undergrad. She's been making this work, and I think that it's something that I think, and Grace is actually, I think, the youngest person in this show.
yeah, she is.
Um, and I think that it's really like kind of speaks to, with like many of these artists, this like awareness that many of us have had at a really early age, that maybe like the things that were promised to us aren't real,
Mhm.
or that they're not fully available to us in the way that they were maybe available to older generations, like for better or worse. Like this idea that like, white people can just go onto the landscape and like have dominion over it. Like that's something that we've now sort of looked at and realized how wrong we really were. I mean, in so many ways, and are kind of like reassessing our role all the time. Right. And so I think that, she hit onto this in a super early part of her career. So it's interesting to think about like, well, where do you go from there? And like, what reparations can you make? But also like, what bigger conversations can be had from that awareness, like moving forward.
Absolutely. I wish more male painters, even myself, and I should probably dedicate more time to the concept, were capable of calling themselves out in their cultural position as culpable for what they're culpable for. And that's just, she's done something that people are so afraid to do. It's amazing.
Absolutely. And with that, I think we can go to
the next slide.
Although I could just keep talking about Grace.
Yeah, me too. I was like, and another thing.
It's almost 7 already. We're just cruising through.
Yeah, it's pretty quick.
So, and I think it might be good to have you talk about Jason's Samson paintings, which actually, could you go to the next slide? Because I think it's just Samson on the next slide. There we go. Because I think these works were sort of like the first things that you selected as like, I need these to be in the show. There's like something about this. And so I would love for you to kind of go into these works.
I'll start with what is the fair preamble, which is I've known Jason for a really long time. And he'd been working for about 2 years on I believe it's a 6 foot by 6 foot or a 5 foot by 5 foot square or a shorter rectangle you're seeing of Samson with his hands in the mouth of the lion. Took about 2 years to start and finish the painting. Mm-hmm. And I remember the conversations were about this kind of embattlement with the work he was doing at the time in Chicago, embattled with this sensation of owing his family more presence in life physically. And in a way that I think relates to a lot of people in a lot of different demographics. He's taking forwardly a lot of care of his father presently. And in coming from previously contemplating these things to the second painting, where he's now ripping the lion open, relative to the narrative of the story too, Samson is kind of subsequently after this defeated by, the extent of the story he's defeated by. And Jason is very much feeling this like preemptive awareness of success that is always subsequently followed by a catastrophic defeat. And these paintings too, in their palette and scale, really bring me to this very contemporary and even I'll say millennial kind of like garishness in going through one's day, like dressed in pink as Elmo, like going through the most traumatic day of your life and then turning around and someone's like, this isn't real. And these kinds of like vague and superlative realities we're living felt very related in these works and in also discussing the process of the work. I couldn't not kind of lead with them first. I thought the kind of like figure embattled and then figure releasing the battle, not to say it's over, just to say that there's still like more now happening in the story, felt so timely and very circular.
There's something too, like you said about the palette, there's this like cuteness to it juxtaposed with violence. And I think there's something to like that parallel of it always sort of feeling like it's on the precipice of like just being really gnarly all the time. Is something that, or even like in the battle kind of language, like there's something about that fatigue of just constantly being embattled, which is something that like a lot of people in our generation I think struggle with, is like the news fatigue or the I can't wait till we're not living through a historical event. Oh, wait, we're like going to live through another historical event tomorrow. Thing that feels like kind of ripe in these works, like just that sense of emergency. But that it's also like adorable and lovely and colorful to come
And
along.
so, yeah, so fun. It feels these paintings feel like paintings you would hang in a children's room sometime.
Yeah.
You know, like sometimes you're like, that's a very approachable and youthful image, and then there's actually quite a bit of like sad gestures that happen, very like real injury, you know. And I really love that too. I think the contemporary has been very funny about one coming to terms with that personally, and these do that to me in the artistic representational way.
Sorry, Jess is starting to send me questions, which is great. And a great
Cool.
plug for me to mention that for any of you who are tuning in, who have any questions about any of these works or about the process, feel free to enter them into the chat, and Jess is sending them over so that we can read some of them towards the end. But we'll keep it pushing because I know we're like just enjoying this so much that we're running on time. So Jess, you can go ahead and go to the next one, which I think is Maddie. Yeah, this painting is feels super familiar to me. And like the first time I ever saw it, I just immediately had this like recognition of something like, so I think I mentioned previously, but Maddie Job is from Clearwater, Florida, which is the town that I'm also from, which is the world headquarters of Scientology. And it's also where the first original Hooters is, fun fact. So there's just a lot of things happening in this town, but it is like also a sleepy, beachy kind of old Florida feeling. And a lot of Maddie's work is really nostalgic and kind of thinking about these places that have been really significant to her, and some of the memories and animals and sensations of growing up in this place. And so, yeah, this one just is like, to me, has such a presence in the space. It's 120 wide. It's a big, big painting. And its manta rays are the sort of large figural shapes that are in there. But I think it also reads as like abstraction potentially if you don't know that you're looking for manta rays. But to me, it like they stood out immediately, right? And so I think there's also this thing that's happening in Maddie's work with the textures. Like in person, this work is super shiny and super layered. And it just feels really calming to think about, like coloring on a giant coloring book page, and it's on paper, and it's just hung with T-pins in the wall. And so there's something about the making of these works that feels really available when you're standing near it, because it's just these giant, 3 panels of paper that are sort of like seamed together. And yeah, there's something childlike and nostalgic about this. And there's like this heavy patterning that also talks to Jason's work. And with these large animals, there's something also that kind of talks to Corey's work, which we'll get to. So there's a lot of good corollaries here. But Maddie was somebody who I knew had to be in the show also, because it just feels so familiar to me. And also as an artist working in Boulder, Denver, but thinking about the place that she comes from and being homesick. I don't know, there's something that like longing is really present in a lot of these works also. And so, yeah, big fan of this one.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. I think meeting this physical piece was what also hammered home for me the importance of this body of work.
Mm-hmm.
She's a genius maker as far as it pertains to everything, but the scale of this really commits itself to this observance of the land and also of a kind of like flat version of the land that it takes you a second to get to. You're like, oh, you do have to tilt it all vertically up and look at it in places where there's no definition or no rising features, you know? And that means you're seeing different elements and different technical call outs. And I would say it took me about like 10 minutes to see the manta rays, which is not to say it's really just to say it's perfect. I don't know. I had no context to the kind of like the perspective. I was so like experientially overwhelmed in this like responsive way to the palette and the tone, and then the surface texture, like you said, brings you to this place where it feels like you're like I'm acting like you can hold the painting like this, but there's just such a materiality visually here that I think, like you said too, relates to the surfaces of a lot of the other works in the show as well.
Yeah. Okay, Jess, you can go on to the next one. Oh, and here's Corey. Perfect.
Woo!
And we're kind of like moving through the space from left to right, sort of like we did Micah's great piece. Leo, I'm not talking to you. I'm sorry. We had Micah's great piece, which is on like the front entranceway with the vinyl. And then we came around through like off to the left. And now we're sort of circling back around. So this is Corey Fetter's work, sculptural, obviously. The shadows were like an added bonus that we didn't know we were going to get. Kind of came together as we started lighting the work, but it does kind of like speak to the concept of the behind the piece, which is really special. So Corey's been thinking a lot about how like we interact with the land and sort of like what knowledge the land holds that we have been sort of like prevented from accessing by our inability to really look and take the time to be deeply in touch with that relationship. And I think Corey is a person who is super tuned in and really like is very grounded and is kind of like respecting the sensations in her body and sort of like the way that she moves through the world is really intentional. And it's something I really appreciate about her as an artist and a human. And this work, and also this work is super playful and fun and childlike. And so basically the jar on the bottom is meant to represent like what we collect and what we store as humans. And then there's the little strawberry girl, ladybug girl in the middle, going up to the watermelon, the dog, and then the big butterfly. And they're all kind of meant to be this like progression of our relationship with the land and with kind of ancestral knowledge and things that are sort of unlocked for us when we choose to take time and look for them. And you know Corey from school too, so you.
Yeah, I mean Corey's been I would say dreamweaver of paper product. I say product though, actually, to say it like in the way that like from the like pulp mache to works on flat paper. Corey wins. It's a really stunning thing to kind of see the developments Corey has taken in their practice over the past 5 years from me meeting them in college. The scale of this piece and the texture of its emotional weight is so big, small. It is so light, heavy, sensitive. And it is a masterful kind of like arrangement of these object tokens of life. And it was honestly one of the pieces too that kind of like took the concepts that we had talked about after discussing things and the kind of like curatorial brilliance you brought and just put everything in a nice frame. It's one of those things that really does do this really stunning thing to you emotionally when you walk in the room and you turn the corner. And that's kind of, I think, the power of good work always.
Yeah. And the shadows, I think, also were like, there's just this surprise that like all of these creatures that are in the sculpture itself had like these projections that came out of them. And so it's like their spirit a little bit, which I really like. So yeah, that just added to it. You can go ahead and go to the next one, Jess.
Ooh.
Okay, now we're coming back around, and this is sort of like, as you can see, the order that we sort of went in, and we did skip over Isosa, and I have a slide with just their work coming up in a second. but you can kind of see how all of these things interact together. And that like colorful, joyful, playfulness is really present in the space, which, you know, there's more there, but it is special to like see all of these people's work really like singing together.
Really singing, really bright. Yeah.
Okay, I think you can go to the next one, Jess. Okay. And I'll let you take this one too, because she's another artist that you brought to my knowledge, and I love hearing you kind of talk through the significance.
Thank you. Asosa Adribi is a Nigerian American fiber sculpture material artist, right? And Asosa is so not like forwardly emotionally, just aware and also personally emotional. So in the way they make things, I kind of have always kind of like peripherally witnessed this very smart and kind of modernist simplification of figure, and then a very complicated realization of a flat material object in a way that is fiber all the way. And I think for me, these two pieces are, I don't know how to say, like, I feel like saying things are perfect is expressive, but from seeing the singular figure outlined in this like isolating rainbow, oh man, felt called out. Very interesting. The contexts that the kind of like isolated white chalk line figure make to me in a kind of like sequenced rainbow felt not isolated to a queer politic. And I was really into the kind of just laying on the kitchen floor people feelings of it, you know? The work itself, though, too, is of such a scale. In person, this work is really big. It's like, I would say it's like 50 inches wide-ish, 40 inches wide, 50, maybe 60 something long. And you kind of can stand in front of it and really feel yourself like literally being outlined by the object. And I was like, yeah, I think that also in the interspace between this piece and the other two figures, the interconnected, I forget the name of that piece too, but contextually, they both kind of sing to the viewer this same kind of like relationship of yourself is now the figure. And you can kind of emotionally just fall into the sensation of the connection or the sensation of being made out of a mat, you know, being like outlined in rainbow today and kind of isolated. And I just thought that, and still think, I think there's always a place in curatorial statements for Sosa's work, you know, it's just a matter of doing that.
I think too, like reading into her artist statement, and I know that thinking through like violence and police brutality specifically is like at the forefront of her mind. And so reading these works in like that context as well can give them this other sense of like, I mean, the chalk outline comparison like has a darker kind of side to it, but it also has this kind of concept of like how we deify like people and how people can become like more than themselves and can become something that like radiates outward into others. And like thinking about George Floyd specifically, and how like I think there was a quote, you know, maybe one of his children or someone around him said like right shortly after, and this like really stuck with me, was like, he didn't ask to be like the name for all of this. He didn't want that. Like, that's not like, it's great to be like, oh, he died to help us all to realize, no, that's not okay. He didn't do that. He didn't want to do that. No one wanted him to do that. And he shouldn't have to do that. But he does do that in some ways. Like, it's still a name that we associate instantly with like a period of time, a place, a movement, a feeling. And I think that the rainbow body, which I think is called Flux.
Flux.
It speaks to that like power that a body can hold and can project. And then similarly with the other two, like friendship, feelings. And I think that's one too that similarly, like there's a little bit more of a darkness or a sadness. But putting that piece together and like the tactile nature of like braiding the feet and like bringing the hands together, there's something there that feels really uniting and special. And the way that they're kind of reclining and resting is really sweet also.
Yeah. I did have to think about it over time and then started to imagine them sitting on like one of those corner benches in a park.
Mhm.
You know, with your knees bent and you're doing the, I don't want to sit too close to you, friend, but you know, we're friends today.
Or like the chairs on the subway that are kind of like a little too close together because one's like parallel to the other or perpendicular to the other. Yeah. The bent knees. It's really, it's really.
Yeah.
I think I have one more work of Isosa's on the next slide. Yes. And this is like the last image that I put in here as like the wrap up because this is the chain letter, right?
Yeah, this is the thing that also, as far as I remember when we were looking at the catalog of work, or Sosa's body of work, we were like, holy fucking goddamn. Like, never in my life has an object been so commanding also in an individual sense. And I think, no, I'm dramatic. It happens, I'm commanded by objects pretty frequently, but this one really commands an emotional brevity, I think, that really does make it space.
So similar to Micah's great. You can do a lot with a few words. And this one to me is like sort of the summation of the show, right? It's like there's all of these artists who, you know, have these connections, sort of like reaching out into the abyss, like hoping for sort of a response to the questions that they're asking. And the answer is just this blank page of notebook paper, like what will you add? You know, what will you say?
I'll say too, I think the scale of this one adds to that as you kind of progress the room. The work is varying in size pretty frequently. I would say at the start of the process, you have Micah's small work, and then here you again you have something in the 12 by 18 or 12 by 14 scale, and you do get closer to it. It does feel like, oh wow, I can really observe this page of text and kind of like feel this very intimate, soft material object on the wall as this kind of relationship establishing thing to the question, or maybe just statement of thinking of you.
And with that, I have to ask one more time for the folks who have tuned in. If there are any questions that you have about the show, we would love for you to write those into the chat. And we'll kind of wrap up our thoughts a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think like walking through all of the work together and kind of talking about some of the connections between like not only the artists that are there, but the ideas that they're bringing up in their work just kind of reminds me something that we put in the essay, which was like, we're sort of trying to like gently suggest or gently remind something with this body of work that, you know, maybe we all already know, but that like, I think this ability to be more connected to each other and to news events and to be like absorbing constantly like connections and relationships, like while so amazing to be able to like broaden our view and broaden like who we see as community. Like there's also this like negative side to it, which is that like you feel everything so intensely. And like so many people in our generation like are just like so much more empathic than like previous generations seemingly. And I think that that really comes through in like this body of work as a whole. And so, yeah, wrapping up with this piece, I think it's nice to kind of like bring it back to like the emo quality of like a lot of work and how like both you and I think we're looking for work that gave us that like deep kind of heart feeling.
Yeah. There's this kind of I'm just a kid and life is a nightmare sensation. And I think that the bright, funny, I mean, that's like a really simple simplification, but the work does kind of come with this brevity that the persons who've compiled these bodies of work individually resonates with this empathic, long form sensitivity to the experiences at hand, and then this awareness that depicting these kinds of experiences and relationships can be done in very many formal ways, and very many sentimentally informed ways.
Yeah.
And I think as far as experiences go, it's my number one right now. Yeah.
Well, thank you for going through all of it. It's been such a joy working on this project with you, and I am so glad to see this show having its moment and bringing all of these people together. All artists to watch, all people to kind of keep an eye out for, because I think everyone in this grouping has like a very beautiful, bold career ahead of them also.
Me too.
I do have one question that has come in, and they are specifically asking about Jason's work, about the Samson pieces. Were they designed digitally and then transferred to a canvas, since the positioning is exactly the same with Samson and the lion from both, or were they both done freehand? Do you know?
So the technical, Jason went ahead with the first one, and that is a freehand mostly with projection assistance, like from a projector and a slide of the image outlines.
Cool.
And then the second painting is a deduction on the first one. So he did take a photograph of the first painting, and then I believe he just reduced the value and then did a projection of the first painting on the second canvas.
Mhm.
After kind of thinking about dimensions, he turns it off, goes back in, moves things around, because they are not actually exact copies of each other at all.
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot of technical moves that happen between both paintings that in reality, you could say he maybe successfully traced 25% of the first painting in producing the second painting. But the second painting is 75%. How do I very purposely and carefully paint this detail in to exactly replicate the color tone and frequency? Because in the grass there's a line frequency that is very particular, and he was dealing with the dropping of the lion's arm down and the kind of literal tear in the lion's body that kind of changes its mass. And he was like, I'm losing it in the grass. It was really fun.
I love that baby lion also makes a little scratch on Samson's leg and then runs away.
Yeah, it's a perfect little.
It also feels like this, like the motion is so much more clear, like that sense of movement, because the scale like opens up to accommodate the ripping apart of the lion, and those fingers, like just so good between the teeth. I love it.
The Starman body too, I thought was just an appropriate sentiment. And at the time, I think it had been like a couple months, maybe a half year since Starman himself had died. And there was just so many things to think about for Jason, processing the kind of like present stress, emotional trauma, and this ongoing situation with his dad too, in taking care of one's father. I think the formalism though, to answer the whole question, he definitely traced 25% of it from the first to the second, but the first painting he painted and he was like, the whole time.
Yeah. I think so far that is the only question that we have. And so I guess while we wait, just in case there are any more that come in, just kind of covering final ground, where can people find you and your work, and what projects do you have coming up?
Oh my God. Okay, so I am on Instagram as Alexander Richard Wilson, and I think my website is also my name, which is Alexander Richard Wilson. It's alexanderrichardwilson.art, and then presently I have a show at the New York Studio School in December of 2021, and then I have a show at Dominicans O'Connor Art Gallery this November too. And Dominican University is outside of the city, very city proper limits of Chicago. And then the New York Studio School, I think, is in upper Manhattan, not lower Manhattan. Maybe it's in Harlem. I'll Google Maps it and tell you in the comments later.
So many good show opportunities coming up for you. I'm super excited for you.
Thanks. It's been an exciting year of, I think a lot of people are either in the position of having dealt with the disaster and are dealing with it still, or still dealing with it and have not clearly like straight out benefited, but have straight out changed their lives.
Mhm.
And I feel fortunate that the life change for me hasn't been terrible. It's been pretty, yeah.
Especially with adjusting to a new city and kind of finding your footing in Denver. I think it's like, it's been really cool to see you, just like since I've known you, kind of like find some people that, you know, have arts connects and friendships, and like be able to kind of sink into it with this show too, and like working with people that you like in Denver.
It's been really easy to like people here as time has gone on. In a like coming out of Chicago, there was very much a head spin to leaving that space. And there was like so much going on in the world at the time, that establishing those kind of artistic emotional connections did take like 4 months of isolation before. It did. It took like a lot of time and thinking, and I was processing, and everyone's still processing. That's kind of a weird, fun conclusion I've come to in dealing with this show and processing installations, and then dealing with the other events in life. It takes so much to get through the emotional experiences one goes through that to expect a resolution is silly. You're always processing, just keep processing.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to leave it and a good takeaway. And just want to say thank you again to you for your time to put all this together with me and have this conversation. And
Absolutely.
thank you to Jason, Micah, Isosa, Corey, Maddie, and Grace as well for lending your beautiful work. Thank you to the Colorado Community Foundation and the Andy Warhol Foundation for their generous sponsorship. And also a reminder that Chain Letter is on view for another couple weeks. The closing day is November 6th, which is a Saturday. And we would love for you to come and enjoy the show before it closes. And thanks to all of you for tuning in.
Yeah, it was so lovely.
Thank you. Yep. And I'll see you soon.
Yes, very soon. Like days and nights.
Yeah. Have a good night. Goodbye, everyone.
Good night, everybody.